Okay, we got it. All right. So let's the last topic. So we talked about the brain and the brain stem last through that recorded lecture last week that I hope you all took advantage of because there's excellent all right.
Oh,
So
hold on.
let's the last topic. So we talked about the brain, the brain stem last through that recorded lecture last week. That I hope you all took advantage of.
Okay, Curtis 2 is quiet now. Sorry about that, everyone.
Annie, there was no homework. There was just, if you remember, last Thursday, I just put up a video for you all to watch. And so that was it for last week. But in that video, and I just want to warn everyone, in that video, there's a lot of excellent multiple choice questions. So make sure you did go and view that video for the upcoming quiz. Yuck. Anyways, what I want to talk about for our last part of this lecture on biology of behavior and mental processes is I want to talk about the broader area. So in that lecture last week, it went over the different areas of the brain, from the brainstem to the limbic system to the cortical areas of the brain. And for this week, what I want to talk about is the broader aspects of the nervous system. So what's beyond the brain and the spinal cord? And so we're going to talk about two systems tonight. It shouldn't take too long, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so last week we focused on what's called the central nervous system, or the CNS, which is the brain stem, and the spinal cord. It is kind of like the central command system. It says what the rest of the body is doing right or wrong, or we should adjust the what we're doing. Okay. The peripheral nervous system is all the parts of the nervous system outside the brain and the spinal cord. So it's all the nerves that go to your hands and your arms and your legs and everywhere else, your scent, your hearing, your sight, all of those areas that are set outside of the nervous system, but also have something to do with behavior and mental processes. And as we will see, it plays a very vital role in how we respond to other people. Not every response we have are a CNS response. Not every response we have is dealing with the brain itself. A lot of the ways we respond to other people is outside that central nervous system, as we will see here in just a minute. Okay, so here we have the breakdown, and this is where I want to make sure I have this correct. Let me look. Okay. Oh, yeah, we will be done quickly tonight. All right. So we have the nervous system. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the central nervous system. This was that lecture from that I had you watch Thursday when I wasn't able to be here. It deals with the brain cells, all of those kinds of things. Now, what we want to talk about today is the peripheral nervous system, because it also has a huge influence on our behavior and mental processes. And it's very important to understand, because while it's called the peripheral nervous system, we can take over that nervous system through brain processes, thinking, behavior, and you will see that post-traumatic stress, post-trauma, everything that we experience as traumatic is not something that deals with our brain. I know this sounds strange right at this moment. Not all our reactions, when someone says they're having a traumatic reaction, it's not necessarily something that is going in their central nervous system, in their brain, and saying, I need to respond this way to keep myself safe. No, most of these actions are happening outside of our areas of consciousness. They're happening outside of our central nervous system, the thing that gives us consciousness, we only become aware of them. Okay. And so let me take you through this. The peripheral nervous system transmit information to and from the central nervous system. And we have two types of peripheral systems. We have what's called the somatic nervous system, which controls skeletal muscles, all of those things. Believe it or not, when you're sitting still, you're not actually sitting still. So let's say we're all sitting in a chair right now, okay? Without using technical terms, I'm going to just say the butt muscles. Even though you think you are in a central nervous system perspective, think that you are sitting there perfectly still, perfectly okay. Your butt muscles, if you're sitting in a chair, are moving every 5 seconds. This is a somatic nervous system. Why are those muscles moving? Because they want to make sure that those muscle areas are staying active, so that they don't die away. Remember what I said either a week ago or even last week's lecture, that if you don't use a nerve cell, that nerve cell dies. You don't get it again. Okay. And part of the muscle structure is if you don't use it, you lose it. So when you're sitting still, your muscles that you are sitting on are constantly adjusting themselves. If you want an example of this is when you get older, those nerves stop to react as quickly, and hence someone who is elderly, you've heard the term bed sores. Bed sores are not because the individual was laying there for too long of a period of time. It was because those somatic nerves that deal with control of skeletal muscles have worn out. They're tired, they're done. And so those bed sores are the dying muscle cells because the nerve system is no longer working with that system to make it so that the muscles are constantly contracting at about a 5-second interval. Okay. So even when you're sitting, I know this doesn't sound healthy. Even when you're sitting, your muscles are actually working. Even though, according to some health people, they're not. Believe it or not, sitting does burn muscle calories. But anyways, we'll get to that conversation at a later date. The autonomic nervous system is a system that happens because it needs to. It needs to happen on an autonomic level. So this is blood vessels. This is the heartbeat. This is breathing. This is the gustorial system that is taking in nutrients and expelling waste. This is all those systems that are happening, and there's at one time in the human body there could be hundreds of autonomic processes that if we had conscious control over, it would drive us nuts. We couldn't deal with that amount of information. And so the autonomic nervous system takes care of all of those systems that if we were to say, okay, how many times do we your resting pulse? Okay, let's use this as an example. The majority of individuals at a resting state have a pulse of between 88 to 98 pulses per second. What is that? That's the amount of blood that is moving through your vessels. Okay. Those pulses measure the amount of blood that is going through. Now, we have 60 seconds in a minute. So I want you to imagine if we didn't have an autonomic system, would you be able to pay attention to this lecture if you were saying pump, 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 pump? Or if we take it to another level, remember to breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out while you're also telling your blood vessel system to pump, 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 pump. So there's a lot of things that we're not aware of in our system that is just automatic. And this is where it comes to, like I said, stress and trauma. Why do people have trauma responses even though they don't think about the trauma? Why is it that for example, someone who has been raped, they can smell the scent of their rapist and they instantly go into a trauma response. They instantly get ready to fight or flight. Why is it that our system does this? It's because it doesn't occur on a conscious level. It does not occur within the central nervous system. It's an automatic response that our system goes through these two divisions called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic sympathetic system. Okay. The sympathetic system, excuse me, gets us prepared for fight or flight. So it prepares our system to either fight someone or run away from something. And so what does that require the system to do? It requires the system to shut down everything that is non-essential and give the energy in the blood system to what is necessary to survive that situation. And when you think about fight or flight, run, hit, all your energy needs to go to the extremities, meaning that it needs to go from the central system to your arms and your legs so that you can fight or flight. Okay. That's the sympathetic nervous system. It's what gets us going. It releases cortisol. It releases all of those things that get us to mobilize or to hide. The parasympathetic system, if you want to think about this, so this is a bad example because don't think of this in brain system. The sympathetic nervous system is you on cocaine. Okay. The parasympathetic system is you on weed. It calms you down. It brings you to a stabilized position. It starts to bring fluids back to the central areas of the body. All right. And so let's look at these two systems in action, though. Somatic. Okay. All right. All right. We get that aroused body. I'm just going to go back to this graphic back here because those words are boring. All right. The first time I taught introduction to psychology, I taught it in a class where there were still some very old school cops. And back before the day of tasers, yes, your professor was back. He did exist before the time of, when a cop carried a taser instead of a gun or what. Yes, I existed back then. But I had an old school cop in one of my first introduction to psychology classes. And he said, Dr. Peterson, is this the way I need to understand the sympathetic nervous system? When we used to come on top of individuals who were fighting, the first thing we would do is look at their crotch and smell. And he said, the reason we looked at their crotch and we smelled is if they urinated themselves and defecated themselves, we wouldn't get involved. We would just create a safe boundary for them to duke it out or do whatever they are, because they knew if they were to get directly involved, more people would be harmed. Okay. And I said, absolutely. That's a sympathetic response. Because when a person gets to the point, and I think we've all watched this in movies, if you've watched a war movie, Gladiator, I know there's a scene in Gladiator, that old show with Russell Crowe has it in it, and they're about to go in battle, and you look, and the hero looks, and the person is urinating themselves. and the commander says, keep yourself. They try to assure them. Why is it that people, when they're in such extreme conditions, urinate and defecate? It's because those systems in their body, they're at such a sympathetic point that their body no longer wants to expend energy um, processing urine and processing a bile. So it gets rid of it. It makes a person pee themselves and it makes them defecate. Okay. At that point, when a person has reached that point, you cannot rationalize with that person. They're either going to run or they're going to beat up anything that's in their way to the point of death because they're at that point. So when you're in a sympathetic position and you notice the person across from you, they've urinated themselves or you can smell defecation, leave. Leave, because no matter what you do, they're going to keep going until someone is dead. All right. And so this is the extreme part of the sympathetic nervous system, is that it prepares us to protect ourselves either from running or going against or fighting. Okay. This is if you probably heard this term, the fight flight response. The parasympathetic system is the opposite of that. It's what kind of keeps us calmed down. It releases endorphins and things to kind of get us to calm down and take care of ourselves. Okay. Now, why is this important? Because there is a correlation between the parasympathetic system, the autonomic nervous system, and the central nervous system. And this becomes very important when we're working with individuals who have gone through trauma. And it's really, really important to kind of keep in mind. Both of these systems rely on our best, well-learned behavior. So if we were raised to be a fighter in conflict, we will fight. If we're raised to avoid conflict, we'll do everything to avoid it. Okay. That parasympathetic fight or flight system is something that is learned within us. And our brain learns it as well. Okay. And so, but we have to realize, when were our best learned behaviors learned? So when we go into a sympathetic response, which areas of the brain and which areas of the sympathetic nervous system is our nervous system going to focus on to then give us our behavioral response? And that behavioral response, our most well-learned behaviors, were not in adulthood. They were learned in childhood between the age of 3 and 6. If you want an example of this, let's run through this. So you get in an argument. And I don't know if I brought this up in this class before. This might just be a review when I talked about the nervous system in the beginning of class. But let's say you and your partner have a problem. Let's make it as simple as you both agreed not to leave the bread out because it gets crusty, it gets hard, you can't use it anymore, blah, blah, blah. So, and you both have this bad habit of leaving the bread out. No, we'll use this as an example. And so you come home before your partner and you notice, hey, they left the bread out. Not only did they leave the bread out, they left the sack open so the bread was hardening. And you're like, oh, we agreed on this, right? But in the beginning, you come up with a very logical explanation, a very thoughtful frontal cortical area explanation that you're going to engage your partner with, of why we shouldn't leave the bread bag open. And so your partner gets home and you go, honey, we need to talk. You remember that agreement we had about the bread? Okay, now I want you to imagine being the other partner walking into that situation. What are you going to do? your sympathetic system is going to come on and you're going to become defensive. And you're going to either try to avoid the conversation or you're going to go, oh my God, are we going to talk about this again? We're going to use that limbic response. We're not going to use, oh, I'm so sorry. I was in a rush at lunch and I just came home. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to use more of a limbic emotional response, right? And so what happens though? We have this logical conversation going on. People start to get stressed and stressed. And what ends up as what was supposed to be a logical why we shouldn't leave we're kind of doing that little slappy thing with each other and calling each other names, and we're doing all that thing. We're doing what we would have done between the age of 3 and 6. Okay. We're having that sympathetic response. What is most well learned? It's that, oh, you're such an idiot, you're stupid, you're dun 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 dun, right? If none of you have experienced that, I feel fortunate for you. But what is happening at that point, and this is why a lot of couples therapy, they recommend that you separate from each other when you have conflict and you feel yourself getting angry and upset. And partner A should go, do something active, and partner B should go do something active. And what is the therapist actually doing at that point? They're trying to calm down your sympathetic nervous system and trying to get you into a parasympathetic, calmer mode by doing it through active engagement. And so they have them, what do? They say, okay, separate for 15 minutes. You go do this, you go do that. And after 15 minutes, come back together and try to have the conversation. It's classical couples therapy, no, couples therapy type of treatment. It's textbook. And so and so this is what I'm meaning by sympathetic parasympathetic response. And I will tell you that it's interesting because and we'll conclude with this because it's going to get into more of what we talk about: learning, cognition, behavior, and all of those things. Is I'm going to bring this up with victimization, because I'm going to tell you that defense attorneys know this system very well. So defense attorneys, they have a sexual assault victim on the stand, and they will purposely stress that victim out. Stress that victim out. Stress them, question, to the point that that victim goes into a sympathetic response. And I don't know if you guys remember when I was a kid, when I got hurt and I didn't know what to do with it, I may have laughed, because that's a very common child reaction, to laugh when you're in an unknown situation. And so what happens in these cases is the victim will nervously laugh, oh, because they're into this sympathetic response. And the defense attorney will go, ha, see, I told you, she or he thinks this is a joke. This should be thrown out. She's obviously laughing at what happened. And so let's go on with this, judge. Let's go on with this, and let's not do this anymore, because obviously this quote unquote victim is laughing about it. It's a joke to him or her. And I'm hoping that I'm not training future defense attorneys in this classroom. I'm hoping that I'm educating you all to make sure that you understand this, so that if you ever deal with victims of assault, that you're part of the prosecution that prepares victims with this, and make sure that the sympathetic response isn't violent. I'm kind of going off on a different direction and tangent for tonight, so I'll stop at that point, because we're going to talk about this a lot more when we get into memory and memory systems. And at the end of the course, when we talk about trauma and trauma responses, I will tell you about individuals that I've worked with who have combat PTSD, who end up in fetal positions by the end of a traumatic event. and victims like this. So this is kind of a preview, but what I want to focus on at right now is this term autonomic. Whoops, I didn't circle it right. That sometimes our stress reactions are at such a point that they're not at our conscious level. They're not at the level that we control. They become automatic processes to where we will fight or flight a situation. And this is the difficulty about human nature, because we all assume that people should be able to handle their stuff. They should be able to be conscious, cognitive, rational people and be able to deal with things on that rational level. But a lot of what we do, especially when it comes to trauma, fear, anger, and all of those things, these things happen even outside of our brain and our spinal cord systems. And so I just want to emphasize this point as we get into this class deeper and deeper. A lot of our responses are outside of our awareness. And this is why in this class I talked about Sigmund Freud. Because while I don't agree with his drive perspective, that we're only driven by those two drives, a lot of our behavior and the reason why we do it is not always within our conscious control. And so we will need to talk about that as we go into these other areas that we're going to get into starting on Thursday, dealing with consciousness, sensation, and perceptions. And then we're going to get into development and learning and memory. Not all the time are these systems something that we control as individuals. Okay, so I think that is